So the sentiment that I'm hearing from colleagues, reading on social media, and seeing in Facebook groups and on Reddit is this. Why are kids behaving so badly, and what's wrong with them? Why aren't there more consequences for their behavior? And why aren't their parents being held responsible? And it's gotten so bad that, as you know, teachers are quitting in droves, and the ones that are staying are bitter, angry, hate their jobs, and if they don't already, they're starting to hate their students as well. In this video, I'm going to get completely real and honest and talk about why this is happening and what we can do to craft our own personal solution. Because I can guarantee you that right now, neither the government, your district, your admin, your school, they're definitely not going to do anything to fix this. And all we can do as the teachers that are still in the classroom, that still haven't quit, is find a solution that works for us. And despite what they tell you on social media, I have to break it to you. You are not enough. That's right. You're not enough. And if you stick until the end, I'll tell you why. Now, before I dive into this video and probably piss off a lot of people, I'd appreciate it if you take your finger and have it dive into the like and subscribe button so that the YouTube algorithm will give this video some love and maybe make more people mad. So the first reason why our students are behaving badly is because the pandemic created a beyond stressful and traumatic environment for these kids. So like us as teachers, many parents felt very stressed and overwhelmed during the pandemic, especially if they were negatively impacted financially, or maybe they were frontline workers and were in danger of being exposed to COVID and possibly bringing it home and exposing it to their families. It was more difficult for parents to take care of themselves emotionally and psychologically because they were locked up inside with their families. So when they were feeling sad or overwhelmed, it often became harder to give their kids the love and attention and care that the kids needed. For many families, this resulted in their kids exhibiting behaviors like anger or being withdrawn. It became harder for children to act in positive ways. And during the lockdown, when the kids saw their parents struggling with their mental health or just being really stressed out and feeling anguish, they themselves had difficulty trying to understand and deal with their own emotions and behavior. Seeing how their parents were reacting and were triggered to these situations, the second reason why our students are misbehaving so much is that they weren't modeled how to cope with these types of stressors in their lives. In the face of difficult situations, they were modeled or taught how to communicate in a healthy way and express themselves. The kids missed out on social and emotional skills from being around their peers. Things like knowing how to make friends, handling stressful situations appropriately, and being able to handle stress are all things that they weren't able to practice and learn in a social environment or in school in general. For so many of these kids, whether they go to public school or private school, charter school, or homeschooled, their social development was stunted from not being able to be around kids their age, which in turn affected how they interact with their friends and with their peers and definitely with their teachers. I mean, think about it. They didn't have to answer to anyone but their parents. And by that point, towards the end of it, their parents might have just been fed up and given up on even trying to discipline them because they too were tired of it and ready for their kid to go off to school. So this is what the students were around and what they experienced, and there was nothing to undo that. So am I saying that it's the parents' fault that the students are acting this way? Well, if you want to overgeneralize, yes. As a parent myself, I take responsibility for my child's psychological and emotional well-being. And I had to regulate how I acted in front of her during the pandemic. Was I perfect at it? No, but I was very self-aware and self-conscious of it. And a lot of our students didn't benefit from parents who did the same. And because the parents were dealing with their own stress and anxiety and depression, it was really hard for them to see how their actions were negatively affecting their kids. I can't really blame them, even though it is a result of their actions, because none of us are infallible and none of us can say that we acted perfectly during the pandemic. So what do we do now? I can tell you this. It would be unreasonable for educators to expect students to act the same way that they did before the pandemic. It's the same way that it would be unreasonable for us to expect a soccer player who broke their ankle to just wrap it up and play the rest of the game and the rest of the season with no problem. That person with a broken ankle obviously would not be the same because they wouldn't have time to heal properly and they wouldn't get the attention that they need. That person obviously wouldn't be the same because they would need rest and physical therapy. And the more that you expect them to just go out there and play as usual, the worse the wound becomes, the worse the injury becomes, and it never heals quite right. So this generation of kids, we can't compare them to the previous generation before the pandemic. We just can't. We all went through so much during that pandemic, and we couldn't wait for everything to go back to normal when we went to our classrooms. A lot of us were just really craving that sense of normalcy and being able to decorate our classrooms again and see the happy faces of our students. Thing is, the students were anything but normal when we got back, because what they experienced during the same time happened when their brains were undeveloped and they had very few healthy coping mechanisms. They came back like that broken ankle with no time to heal and repair. And unfortunately, the powers that be, the education system, our district, any kind of stakeholders, they wanted us to dive right back in and test students and see how bad the learning loss was and just focus on what the students were lacking rather than focusing on how we have to rebuild and restart and reframe how we see education after the pandemic. And students and even us, we had very little time to reacclimate to school culture and deal with the trauma that we all experienced from lockdown. And it's becoming this vicious cycle because how the students are behaving is triggering negative responses from us, which is triggering the students to behave in negative ways. And it just is this never-ending cycle. And we think that more consequences will fix the problem. We're wondering, why aren't they getting detention? Why aren't they being suspended? Why aren't they being expelled? But you guys, the kids are so numb to punishment at this time. I mean, do you really think that suspending them or expelling them is worse than what they had to deal with during the pandemic? We're still hurting too as teachers, as humans. We too faced our own chaos, a death in the family, heartache, pain, possibly abuse or neglect, and definitely social isolation. And maybe during the pandemic, we didn't practice how to cope with these in a healthy way either. And here we are, teachers on one side, parents, administrators, the public on the other side villainizing us. And we're at an impasse. We're blaming each other for what's happening instead of working together on this to find a solution. This is why I said that we as teachers are not enough. We're not enough. We alone cannot fix this problem, and we definitely can't do it under the conditions that society and the education system has put upon us. All I can do is focus on healing with my students, focus on kindness, modeling how to be kind and patient and understanding with them, and caring about these kids unconditionally, giving them a safe space to screw up a lot and not make them feel like that I'm holding a grudge against them or feel like I'm never going to see them the same way in my eyes. And it's so hard when they're triggering us and when their behavior causes us to feel like failures. But it's really important that when they do mess up, that we don't see it as a personality flaw, that we don't make it personal for them, because that's when they internalize it and that's when they act it even more. When they're feeling threatened and worthless because of how we react to them, they're going to lash out even more. We have to understand that a piece of their childhood was stolen from them during that time. And while we aren't equipped to fix it, we can at least be understanding of it. Now, it's one thing if they're violent. I definitely don't condone violent behavior or a lack of consequences for that type of behavior. There are definitely instances when a student should not be in your classroom. They need to be with a school psychologist or a therapist, and they shouldn't be around other students who they can harm. But just for your everyday misbehaving students who maybe yell across the room, they maybe talk back at you, occasionally drop some bad words, all we can do is to set the expectations, but also make our classroom a place where they want to be. They are less likely to want to act up if they feel that your classroom is safe, if they feel that you respect them despite their crazy behavior, and if they feel accepted. I mean, I hate to say it. We have to meet them where they're at. We have to understand that they are not the same kids that we taught before the pandemic, and that's not their fault. I mean, I hate to say it, but we have to adjust our expectations of them. And you may see it as lowering our expectations, but we have to understand that our students are probably not going to meet the expectations that we had before. And that's only going to cause us frustration. It's only going to make us frustrated because we think they should act a certain way. And for many of them, they just don't know how anymore. Because what else are we going to do? Lower their grade? Give them detention? Trash pickup? Call home? Suspend them? None of that is working, you guys. You might think that I'm crazy and say, well, you don't have this person and that person in your classroom. What else are we gonna do? For those of us that still want to teach, we have to find a way to keep our sanity and not turn into these angry rage monsters while our kids are behaving this way. If punishment and consequences aren't working, then we have to come up with another way to approach this. And it's going to be individual for each of us based on our values and our philosophy around teaching and our ethics. I don't have a solution for you. I'm just giving you some background on what's happening to our kids. So maybe a reframe can help the situation. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure there's a lot of you that don't agree with me, that in fact vehemently disagree with me. But regardless, I still would love to know what you think and what your suggestions are. What are you going to do to try to heal what's happening with our students? How are you going to reframe so that you're less frustrated? So if you're wondering how can you make your classroom more engaging and inviting for students so that they'll want to be there and maybe less likely to act up, be sure to click on this video next to get tips on how to do that.